What happens if you break a promise? Breaking a promise has been dubbed untrustworthy, unacceptable, and even just plain mean. But what really happens if you break a promise? And might there be an acceptable reason to do so? Welcome to the channel. I'm Kim Marie, and this channel is all about supporting women to step into their most empowered self so they can live their most fulfilling life. Breaking promises isn't something any of us ever intend to do, and yet it is something that often happens. So today I want to talk about what promises are and aren't, consequences of breaking a promise, when it may be okay to break a promise, and preventing breaking promises. So what exactly is a promise? Ultimately, it is an assurance toward the future, literally in its definition. So what we're doing when we make a promise or someone makes a promise to us is we're giving or getting assurance that something's going to happen moving forward in the future. With that comes a certain amount of psychological understanding or even emotional attachment. You know, we start to rely on that promise being kept, and we start to have a certain dependence on it maybe. And of course, if it gets broken, emotionally, we can have a very significant reaction to it. So what are some of the consequences of breaking a promise? Well, first of all, we might feel a certain amount of guilt or regret in breaking a promise. And of course, the other person might feel that as well if they've broken a promise to us. That's definitely a big piece of it. And sometimes we break promises both to ourselves and to others. And that's one of the biggest things that begins to happen is a breach in trust. We start to feel no trust for the person who broke a promise to us, or no trust in ourselves if we've broken a promise to ourselves and maybe to others. Now, this is really important because with this channel being all about supporting women to feel more empowered, the biggest thing that causes us to feel disempowered is when we lose trust in ourselves. We struggle to connect with our own inner wisdom, our own sense of truth, or even identity. And so breaking trust by breaking promises to ourselves is one of the biggest consequences of breaking promises, because we lose trust in ourselves, and then we ultimately feel extremely disempowered. Another consequence of breaking promises is the potential damage to your own reputation if you break a promise, or to the reputation of others if they break promises, right? It begins to damage how we're perceived, how others are perceived. That's a big consequence because people really want to know that the others that they're interacting with are trustworthy, reliable, all of those kinds of things. So that's a huge consequence of breaking a promise. It can also hurt our self-image when we do that for ourselves. Like if we break a promise to someone else, it might hurt how we see ourselves. But certainly if we break a promise to ourselves, what do? We start to beat ourselves up. We talk about how bad we are, how we can't seem to make anything happen. We can't get the things done we say we're going to do. And it just becomes this perpetuating cycle of self-deprecation, and that is not what we want. So when might it be okay to break a promise? Believe it or not, it really is okay under certain circumstances. And I'm going to share with you in a moment how we can do it effectively and do it in a way that works for both ourselves and others. But when is it actually okay? Well, one of the situations might be that it's actually healthier. It's actually wiser and healthier for you to break that promise, or maybe even healthier for others to break that promise. So for instance, let me just give an example. If you have made a promise to show up at someone's house to help them with something, but you wake up with a fever and you're ill, it wouldn't be wise for you to go over there and try to help them out and expose them to your feverish situation or circumstance, and also deplete your own energy, right? So it's literally a matter of health and well-being that you might choose to break a promise. Another is when it's about self-care, okay? We need to take care of ourselves and hold our boundaries and set our boundaries. So for instance, maybe we've overpromised ourselves. And this happens all the time. I can't tell you how many women I coach that talk about feeling like they've overcommitted to things, or they have too much on their plate and they can't say no and they aren't sure how to do that, and they feel bad to break any of the promises. But the reality is, if you've made a promise to someone or to yourself and you feel like you are struggling to keep that promise because you're starting to burn out, you're starting to become incredibly depleted or overwhelmed or exhausted, it's time to reevaluate the situation. And in that case, that is a situation where you may have to break some of those promises. And I'm going to talk about in a minute how we can break them effectively. It also may be okay to break a promise if you're recognizing that it may actually result in some kind of harmful or unrealistic situation. Maybe you've promised something thinking that it was going to be a certain way or a certain circumstance, and then you realize later, like, oh, wait a minute, I don't really want to do that. That's not comfortable for me. That doesn't feel appropriate, right? Maybe someone asked you to help them out with something, and then you go over there and you're starting to help them out, and then you realize some of the help that they want is to do something that feels misaligned with your values or not allowable to you, or in some way maybe harmful to another, and that is not something you want to keep that promise for. And it's okay to break the promise when you end up in a situation like that. And of course, if it's harmful to yourself, if you go and realize that what you've promised is going to create harm for yourself, whether it's by maybe physically impacting you or emotionally scarring you or on some level mentally messing with you. This is why it's important to allow ourselves to break promises under some of these kinds of circumstances. So how do we handle breaking promises effectively? Well, one of the first things is effective communication. This is so critical. It's definitely frustrating to anyone, including ourselves, if we feel like a promise was made and we were just ghosted and nobody said anything to us, or they just, quickly cancel with no explanation or understanding. And, some people would say, well, I can cancel at whim and it's nobody else's business. There may be certain things that you don't need to share the details of, but maybe you're just having a family situation and you don't want to share the details, but you say to the person, I am so sorry, I promised this to you today and I'm having a family situation and I really cannot get to it. But here's the other part of that communication that's so important. If you're willing to renegotiate the promise, then that's really critical. It's really important to say, I can't get to it today, but I'll be able to get to it by Friday, and renegotiate that situation. Would that be all right with you? Can we extend the deadline? And maybe the person will say, no, I need it today. And you'll have to say, well, I'm so sorry, but somebody else is going to have to do it then because I can't be there. Effective communication is critical. People deserve to have that level of communication if you've made a promise to them. Now, the same can go for you and promises you've made to yourself. How do you talk to yourself when a promise needs to be broken? Most of us would never give ourselves that kind of kindness. And I want to encourage you and invite you to practice being kind to yourself if a promise you've made to yourself doesn't happen the way you wanted it to. For example, if you promised yourself that you were going to get a certain task done today, and the day goes on and you've gotten a million interruptions and it just didn't happen the way you wanted it to, at the end of the day, rather than beating yourself up, communicate with yourself and say, okay, you know what? You promised yourself you were going to do this. You got all these interruptions. I know it was frustrating, but how can we renegotiate this? Maybe we extend the task and put it on the next day or a couple days later, or refit it into our schedule. Or maybe we realize, you know what, it's not as important as I thought it was. I can cross it off the list and I don't need to beat myself up for not getting it done. It's also really important to apologize and make amends where possible. Perhaps you reestablish a certain amount of trust by making amends, whether it's with yourself by doing that task another day, or showing yourself that you're not going to beat yourself up and you're going to act with kindness, and you can do that with others as well. You know, bring deep kindness. Maybe you promised to help someone move and you ended up sick on that day and you feel really bad that you couldn't show up because they were relying on you, and that's the moving day, so it couldn't be renegotiated, right? So perhaps later on when you're feeling better, you could make dinner and bring it over and say, you know, I'm so sorry, but I wanted to bring you a meal. I know you're really busy unpacking, and I'd like to just make amends for not being there when I had promised. I didn't know I was going to get sick, but I do want you to know that it means a lot to me that I keep my promises, and here's a gesture of apology, and let me know if I can help in any way to help you get settled in. This is the way we can make amends and apologize and bring kindness to the mix. And finally, another way of effectively breaking a promise is to also reflect on why the promise was broken in the first place. We want to understand, are we overcommitting? Are we doing too much? Are we making more of something than we should be? Are we prioritizing things that really don't need to be prioritized and can go on the back burner? We need to understand why we broke the promise. Obviously, if it's a fluke like getting sick on the moving day of someone you promised to help move, we can't prevent that. We don't know how that is going to unfold. Things happen all the time. If that's the reason, then there it is. But if the reason is that you said yes when you really meant no, and you didn't really want to do it, or you said yes when you weren't fully aware of all of the details, then that's where the problem starts to come in. So this is where we want to prevent broken promises. And through that reflection, we can begin to do things that help us prevent broken promises. One of the first things that we want to do is be very mindful of making promises and making effective requests and receiving promises from others. Now, I have another video called How to Get What You Want in Life, Work, and Relationships. And that is such a great video to help teach you how to make an effective request and be sure that the promise is solid if someone agrees to what you're requesting. And you can use the same tool for yourself in terms of how you're promising something to yourself. Now that brings me to what I call the trust model. And this is about looking at, can I trust myself to do this thing? If I'm going to make a promise to myself, can I trust another to do this thing? If someone is promising something to me, trust is really critical. And remember, I said promises or broken promises, what happens when we break a promise is that number one thing is it begins to compromise trust, okay, in ourselves or in others. So when we really want to assess our trust, and trust is one of those things that I think a lot of people put a blanket on. In other words, they say, I can either trust this person or I can't. And we forget that maybe we can trust a person in a certain domain of life, but not another. You know, we might trust our doctor friend to set our broken leg, but not cook us dinner, right? Maybe they're a horrible cook, but a really good surgeon. That is what we want to honor here. We don't have to say, I can either trust them or I can't. We want to really look at, well, was it or is it appropriate to trust this person in this domain around what I'm asking? Now, how can we determine that? Well, one of the keys is sincerity, right? Are you sincerely wanting to do this thing you're saying yes to? Is that person sincerely wanting to do this thing they're promising you? Okay. If not, that's really a critical thing to see. And we can often sense it. Our intuition can often feel from another person, do they really want to do this? Or are they just saying yes because it feels like the right thing to do? And we, of course, know within ourselves, do I really want to do this? Or am I just saying yes because I feel like I have to do that, or I have to be nice, or I don't know how to say no, right? We need to look at the sincerity, because the minute the sincerity is compromised, the whole of the trust is compromised. The whole of the likelihood of a promise being kept is compromised. The other is reliability. Now, if it's the first time we're promising ourselves something or someone's promising something to us, we don't really have a track record of reliability. We might know more about ourselves, like how often have we kept promises in general? Is that other person keeping promises regularly to other people? We might have some information to go on, but trying to look for some clues about reliability is also really important. The other thing is competence. Is this thing, and that's kind kind of the domain thing that I was saying. Maybe that doctor is competent to set your leg, but not so competent to cook you dinner. So you want to look at the competence in the domain that you're looking at. Is the person actually capable? Are you capable of a promise that you've made? Do you really know what you're signing up for, and are you capable of doing it? The final thing is capacity. Do you actually have the capacity to do what you say you're going to do? Does the other person, if you see the person running around like crazy, maybe they're not the best person to ask to keep a promise to you. On the other hand, there's a good saying that goes, if you want something done, ask a busy person. Sometimes people that really like to stay busy and are very good at making things happen, they're amazing to ask for, a promise and to get some help from. And they genuinely want to do it. They're sincere about it. They're reliable. They're competent. And, they'll fit it into their day. And that's how they want to operate. But it's really important to consider the capacity and maybe reassure them or you that, okay, are you sure about this? Like, I want you to know that I don't feel this requirement that you commit to this for me. I understand that you're busy and we could renegotiate this, right? So we want to look at those other pieces. I hope this has helped you to consider opportunities to make effective promises, to know what happens when a promise is broken and how it really impacts yourself and your own self-trust as well as others, and how to effectively renegotiate promises and break them if need be, and understand that so much of our path forward is about doing things that we promise to ourselves and to others, as well as what others promise to us. So this is a really important tool to work with. It's going to help you feel so much stronger within yourself as well as within your relationships. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.